With more Canadians being vaccinated, the prospect of safely reopening the economy is on the horizon.
But that post-pandemic recovery could use a shot in the arm, too.
And one place that help could come from is beyond Canada's borders. I'm Adam Toy.
And I'm Dave McIver, and this is Why.
Canada is a country of immigrants. Ever since Europeans landed in North America centuries ago, this land has been the home for generation after generation of newcomers to make a new life. But the coronavirus pandemic puts a twist in this country's history, killing more than 22,000 Canadians and putting a halt to most areas of the economy.
And the role of immigrants in Canada's post-pandemic trajectory could be as important as ever.
The experience by immigrants when they come to this country is not just related or does not just impact that individual, right? That immigrant professional. And I certainly can speak from this from family experience as well. If they've come with a spouse or they come with children, the experience they have actually is a family experience. It's a family dynamic.
That's Adjoa Bohene, CEO of the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council.
Our scope is finding and creating solutions to help champion immigrant talent in the GTA labor market. And so it was founded 15 years ago with the understanding and the knowledge that still exists today that many immigrants, when they come to Canada, have challenges in finding commensurate employment or even employment in general.
And when you say commensurate, that's commensurate with their qualifications?
Commensurate with their qualifications or level of experience in their home countries. So maybe they come here as a director or a senior manager and then are offered frontline positions when they're here.
Toronto is the most popular place for new immigrants to settle into the country, with more than a third making the GTA their first home in Canada. That accounts for why 46% of Torontonians are foreign-born. 41% of Vancouverites and 30% of Calgarians were born outside of the country.
Broadly speaking, what has the experience for recent immigrants been? And if you want to speak specifically to the GTA, what has that experience been during the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, I would suggest to you that's probably similar across the country, right? So for those folks who came in the last year or two, this pandemic, whether from a health outcome, and we know that statistically as well, or from an employment outcome, have been more significantly impacted than, let's say, somebody who came 8 years ago or somebody who was Canadian-born. And so the pandemic really revealed a lot of factors that we already knew pre-pandemic, so the systemic barriers that might exist, or the fact that it is really difficult and challenging when you come here to build and create a network. Those existed before the pandemic, but the pandemic really shone a bright spotlight on some of these systemic challenges.
Tell me more about what these systemic challenges have been. It sounds like there's been a bit of a pattern.
Sure, exactly. So one of them is, how do you build a network when you first come to a country, right? So a lot of immigrant professionals are obviously excited, and we recruit for the best and the brightest from around the world to come and live in Canada. And if they don't already have existing family or social network or business network, they're starting from scratch. So one of the challenges they have is they may not know where to turn, or how do I create a network? How do I network in the Canadian way? And that has been, increasingly difficult during a pandemic when everything is virtual. So now not only can I not go meet somebody for coffee, I have to try and, have that meeting virtually and try to connect with various groups, maybe an immigrant network or with a service provider, settlement service provider virtually.
Yeah, and in order to have that virtual meeting, you have to have that infrastructure that allows for that virtual meeting, be it a smartphone or a computer.
That too, and also just knowing where to go.
Yeah.
Right? So you might, I'm assuming that a lot of folks would Google, I've arrived in Canada, now what? Or something along those lines. But it's not inherently obvious, I would say, that, you would look at it for an employment service provider. What are the supports in finding employment? So you might Google for your employment, and you would find Indeed.com and other sites where postings are listed, but not necessarily recognize that there's also other supports out there, such as the Triac Mentoring Partnership, where our community partners work with recent immigrants to prepare them through a number of ways, and then we help match them with employers and mentors within those employers to help guide them on workplace knowledge and culture, on industry knowledge, and then networking, really helping them, support them to find those commensurate roles or to be employed in their field.
Now, I mean, it's no surprise, and or maybe not no surprise, but it's not news that a lot of these immigrants that come to Canada end up having to find work that is not commensurate with their experience and their qualifications, and that, to my understanding, has really played out in a negative effect on the health of these recent immigrants during the coronavirus pandemic. In the article that you penned in the Globe and Mail in October, you pointed to a lot of folks in the what is it? According to Statistics Canada, 36% of nurses, aides, and patient care service associates responding to outbreaks in long-term care are immigrants. And I know across the country, a lot of frontline workers are disproportionately represented from the immigrant community. What has I'm wondering if you have an idea of what the direct contribution recent immigrants have on the Canadian economy.
From a statistics standpoint, I know that RBC released a report last fall as well that said if we don't come back up to our immigration levels, right, which we didn't meet in what year are we in? We're in 2021. in 2020, that we didn't meet in 2020, that if we don't come back up to those levels that we had originally set, or the federal government set, we could lose up to $50 billion worth of GDP. So I think we also know that, for example, International Student Stats Can has posted that international students bring in $21 billion annually. And so if our borders remain closed, it's not just about students studying, because they can do that abroad now. And I know from one of our directors who is at one of the universities, she said that enrollment is off the charts. International student enrollment is off the charts, but most of that is right now, would be studying virtually from abroad. And so we also want those folks to come into Canada, not only to study here, but to work here and to consume goods and pay taxes and all of those things. So the economic effect is significant. And just want to go back to what you also mentioned initially about the impact on health and just in general. I mean, I think, again, the pandemic has shown how reliant we are on immigrants in our front line and in our healthcare sector. I was a director at a very large home healthcare agency here in Ontario, and with over 3,000 PSWs, and I know from experience and having spent many years there that the vast majority are newcomer, and oftentimes newcomer women. And so what has happened during this pandemic as well in that sector is, as we had school closures and lockdowns, those folks weren't able to work. So here in the very time that we need, that support from PSWs, there was a contraction in the labor market. I mean, there's always too few PSWs, but there was a greater contraction during the pandemic because they couldn't, as many is the case for many, couldn't work and take care of their family.
Joa, as you said earlier, the pandemic has really brought to light some of these inequities with the immigrant community. The federal government aims to admit 1.2 million permanent residents by 2023. What is your reaction to those goals, given Canada's birth rate has been flat for years?
I think it's the business case for immigration in some sectors or sometimes still needs to be made. But I think also, as I mentioned, that RBC report is quite clear, again, in showing the economic impact of having immigrants, and the fact that if we want our economy to grow and if we want our aging parents to be taken care of or ourselves to be taken care of, this is critical. And so the announcements of the levels, which in the next 3 years, the intent is to bring in more immigrants than we have in previous years. As a child of an immigrant or immigrant myself, I'm excited about that because I think that it brings richness and diversity, but it is also not just the right thing to do from a normative standpoint. It's smart business sense. We do, to your point, we have not produced enough children for decades. And so, as I always like to say, unless every Canadian who can goes out and produces zero point 0.6 more of a person, we're in trouble. This is math. This is not something invented. This is math. We needed to have a birth replacement rate of 2.2, and we have been for years at 1.6. So Adam, I mean, it's about our ability to enjoy, in some ways, our standards of life as citizens, and then it is about the ability to have things done and contributors to our tax base. And so if we want our country to flourish, if we want our businesses to flourish, we need them. I mean, we know now with, in certain sectors like IT sector, they always have also had challenges finding enough talent, but with border closures, that has only increased. And yet there's a rising demand because of the virtual digitization that we've gone through in many sectors that previously may not have been as quick on it in the last year. We know that there's, even greater demand for certain skill sets, and those skill sets are currently not in our country. And last but not least, I think there's also the interesting perspective that we, in many relationships, we need to reflect, or in our organizations, we would need to reflect the society in which we live. So whether across the country, we have a greater diverse population, and certainly in the GTA, we have an extremely diverse population. And so you want your, internal organization to reflect the external society. We want our public sector to reflect the citizens, that they're serving. So I think, there's so many reasons that, at some point in time, I always say it's hard to argue or good luck arguing the world is flat, right? That Earth is flat. And I think the need for immigration in Canada is becoming close to that. To argue against it, it's like arguing that the Earth is flat.
Indeed. So given everything that we've discussed, and I want to touch on something that you mentioned a little bit earlier, is what supports do new immigrants need in order to be able to immediately and significantly contribute to this country? What role does various levels of government have to play in that? And is this the opening up and the economic recovery following the coronavirus pandemic? What kind of opportunity does that present to help the immigrant community, the recent immigrant community in the country?
So I think it's government and the corporate sector, right? So I don't think everything is always sort of the responsibility of the government. I think there's all of us perhaps have a role to play in this. And certainly from the government side, continuing to provide pre-settlement services. So how can we prepare those who have been invited to apply for permanent residency? How can we prepare them before they even land? How can they come to understand, what is Canada all about? When I land, where do I go? Who can help me? All sorts of pre-arrival services. And then when they're here, continuing to provide that support. And we don't provide direct service, in essence, to immigrants, but having those, community partners and those settlement agencies across the country where they can turn. And it's about employment, but it's also just about social service. I mean, I know if you've traveled abroad as well, Adam, I find one of the most humbling things is always trying to understand the transit system in a new country, in a new city. It's different everywhere, right? And you always feel kind of foolish because you think you should be able to figure it out, but it's tough. And these all become stressors. And, if you're bringing a family, how to enroll your children in school. So all of those settlement pieces, is where I think it's incumbent upon us as a country to help people. Then, as we're looking at employment services, and this is where we partner then with employers to do a couple of things in our community partners. One is as I mentioned, the TRIAC mentoring program. It's been shown to be very effective in providing that confidence and the know-how for immigrants to, find employment within a shorter span of time than if we didn't have this intervention in settling into our labor market, which is great. It also, on the employer side, we also help them understand how to scale and how to be in an inclusive workplace. And that was our the report we released on March 3rd really focused on that. How do we create an inclusive workplace, and who are the actors, so to speak, that are critical in doing so? And that's both middle management, which sometimes is overlooked in the discussion, or it's just assumed they know how to do it, and then leadership, executive support, and what is the accountability and responsibility of executives. So I think that then there's sort of our social dynamics, right? What does each one of us do? What does each one of us do? Or, if you belong to a church group or community group, what are we doing in order to help newcomers feel welcome in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our school system? So I think that, every sort of sector or factor in society has a role to play, and its government, its employers, its agencies like TRIAC. Our mission, as I said, is really, and we are 95% immigrant led. Our employee base is 95%, immigrants ourselves. So we really live that passion every day about how do we help newcomers integrate into the labor market.
For those executives and managers, what's been the catalyst in their paradigm shift around making their workplaces more immigrant inclusive?
I think in some of the leaders who are also champions of TRIAC, they themselves come from an either equity-seeking group or an underrepresented group. And so they may be immigrants themselves. They may be racialized. They may come from the LGBTQ community. So as more and more folks have risen into leadership, there's that self-acknowledgement or that recognition, right? That they can change things for others, so to speak. Beyond that, even whether representative of a group or not, a lot of leaders, and that's why I come back to sort of the business case, realize that this is not just a normative, it's a nice thing to do. It is the right business move, right? Because you're not able to fulfill the pipeline, your talent pipeline. If you can't fill your talent pipeline, you can't execute on your, if we're talking private sector, right? You can't make enough money for your stakeholders, shareholders. So it's really now become evident to many executives that it is not only the right thing to do, but it is the smart thing to do. The experience by immigrants when they come to this country is not just related or does not just impact that individual, right, that immigrant professional. And I certainly can speak from family experience as well. If they've come with a spouse or they come with children, the experience they have actually is a family experience. It's a family dynamic. And so, the plight or the difficulty or challenges of being unemployed or underemployed actually impacts family health. And so I think that's something that we need to take into consideration as well, is that we're talking about sort of, the next generation also. And that's why you see so many second and third generation immigrant children just really striving, right? Because we saw also the struggles of our parents, and they came here to provide children, with many more opportunities. And now we feel it really incumbent upon ourselves to not only make those opportunities happen, but seize them when they come along.
This Is Why is produced by me, Dave McIver, and Adam Toy. It's a national radio show and a podcast.
You can reach us by email, thisiswhy@globalnews.ca, and on Twitter @thisiswhy.
If you like what you hear and want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to This Is Why so you never miss an episode. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend.
Thanks for listening. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and stay home. We'll see you soon.
I'm Sarah Ritchie. I'm a reporter for Global News in Halifax. I was working the day everything changed in Nova Scotia last April. My team has spent the last year asking tough questions about how a gunman disguised as a police officer murdered 22 people over 13 hours. On our podcast, 13 Hours Inside the Nova Scotia Massacre, we examine this tragedy hour by hour. We're learning there's a lot more to this story. Listen to all 13 episodes now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.